record this now. But thank you for everybody that was able to join us for the call. Looking forward to bringing everybody together for a nice discussion on regional corporate liaison and sharing some insights from some of our staff that are joining us. So just, I think we'll go around, do a quick intro. So if you want to let us know, and I'll call people out because I know not everybody's on the camera, but if you let us know your name and your role within the region and what institution you're with. So Candy, if you want to start us off.
Sure, I'm Candy Mink-Salas. I'm the Regional Director in Region 6, and I'm at Azusa Pacific University.
Okay, thank you. Joey?
Hi everyone, my name is Joey Capriva. I am at Columbia University and I am the corporate sponsor coordinator for Region 2.
And Leah. Yeah, you might be muted if you're trying to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Jarnigan, and I am serving as the 2020 co-chair for sponsorships for the NASPA Western Regional Conference, which will be happening in Anaheim. And I work at the California State University Office of the Chancellor.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. And I know we had a few people that sent me messages last minute that campus emergencies are happening or different meetings. So we'll send this out to everybody afterwards. But I'm going to turn it over to my teammates, Fred and Christy, one, to introduce themselves, and then two, to take us through the agenda. If at any moment, and I know since we have some people that are on the call by phone, not on video, if you have any questions, just feel free to step in, let us know. If not, we'll definitely have some open Q&A time at the end. I sent in the meeting invite is the agenda that we'll follow. So if there's anything that's not on here that you want to address, please feel free to let us know. But Fred and Christy, the floor is yours.
Hey, Danny, thanks a lot for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Fred Comparato. I'm the Senior Director of Corporate Development at NASPA. I've been with NASPA for 11 years now. And to give you a little bit of background, prior to that, I was doing exhibits and sponsorships over at Aku, Hawaii for about 5 years. And I'm based here in Columbus, Ohio, in the Ohio NASPA office.
Hi, everyone. We have a new arrival. Hi, Chris. We were just introducing ourselves, so I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself real quick and tell us what your job role is with the region.
Yeah, I'm just relieved I'm not late. Not that late. Hi, I'm Chris Myers. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at Washington State University Tri-Cities, and I'm the Region 5 Director.
Awesome, wonderful. Glad to have you. All right. So I'm Christy Jacobson-Durdy, and I'm the Assistant Director for Advertising and Exhibits at NASPA. Prior to being in this role, I was in Student Affairs for 11 years, and I did this job actually as a corporate liaison for Region 4 West. And I did this kind of something I enjoyed doing, and did it in a volunteer capacity, both for NASPA as well as for Aku, Hawaii, when I was in residence life and worked in that capacity as well. So it just kind of seemed like the natural next step when this job became open for NASPA. So that's kind of how I came into this position. And so I definitely have a different perspective, if you will, having taken this role at the regional level now at the national level. So.
Yeah, and before we dive into the regional component of how we can best support you all and what you all are trying to do with your regional events, we wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what Christy and I are doing on the corporate development side of NASPA in general. So as you all know, there's the annual conference. It's a very large event, as we all know, lots of different things happening, and we're managing the two main things really at the conference is the exhibit hall and that experience with attendees. And then the second piece is we have lots and lots of sponsors, ranging from $2,500 all the way up to our platinum sponsors. So that's one element that we do. In addition to that, we have many VPSA events throughout the year, such as the new VPSA Institute that just happened in October. There's the AVP Symposium and Institute coming up in January, along with the VPSA event, that the summit that's sort of new in June, that we're working on sponsorships. And then we also, as you all know, we have two larger events throughout the year, which is the Strategies Conference in January, along with the Student Success Conference in June, which is NASPA's second and third largest event of the year. And then, I know you all know this, we have lots of other smaller events throughout the year as well, such as Multicultural Institute and the Leadership Educators Institute, Military Symposium. I know I'm blanking on many other ones, but our goal is to cultivate companies to support all those different types of smaller events throughout the year. And then finally, for those who cannot make events in a one-on-one basis, we have an advertising program through the newsletter, digital leadership exchange, program guide ads, and things like that. So kind of want to give you a quick snapshot of that. We're not just working on the annual conference, but we have all these other things happening throughout the year as well. So with that said, I wanted to hand it over to Christy, where she's going to really talk about the best way to support you and to help you out, let you all know that we're here to help you with the process. And she's going to kind of start with her experience when she was at Region 4 West and dive into like the before, the during, and the after at the regional level.
And, you know, what I have here on the agenda is just kind of what I found worked well for us. So it's just kind of not necessarily, you know, what's going to work for everyone, but worked well for me. When I was at the region, we tripled our fundraising from the time I started to when I left for West. And I think it was just kind of how we kind of methodically went through and just the whole process of you know, the touch points we had with our exhibitors and just kind of how we just managed our sponsorship and managed those relationships we had with our exhibitors. And I think that's a big part of, you know, of this experience for exhibitors at the regional level. So I think that's what made me successful. And so I'll share with you guys what I did, and you can take from that what you'd like, and don't take what you don't. But this is just what I did and what worked well for us. I think another piece of it is that, you know, I think a lot of times exhibitors will, or sponsors will, go from one region to the next. And so I think it is important that the experience that they have at one region is good, because that does translate to the next. And so just it is what it is. And so it's important, I think, that we have a good experience overall. So having said that, I'll just kind of share with you what I've done at the regional level. So I'm just kind of going, I would say, a little bit prior to the event happening, because I know that's kind of where most of you guys are going to be at this point. Most of these events are kind of happening within the next month or so, if not the next week, from what I understand. Is that right, Danny? Am I kind of in the right space?
Yeah, we do have the 4 Region 1, 4 East, 4 West, and Western Regional for 2019 that are taking place over the course of the next 3 weeks, but we also have some people that are part of the planning for the 2020 cycle.
Sure. Okay, so having said that, so what I would normally have done is I would have gotten with next year's conference staff already and had possibly tried to create some type of postcard for next year's conference to make sure I had that on hand going into this year's conference, to make sure that I have something to hand out to this year's exhibitors to make sure that they know what's coming up for next year. So they have that as kind of a save the date to make sure they know what's coming up and that they're putting that in their budget for the next year. So just to have it in the back of their mind already, that this is a good experience and that they want to come back. And so it also kind of gives them an idea, and hopefully you guys will have a budget already knowing what your exhibit booths are going to be costing anyways, which generally doesn't change from year to year. So it's kind of a nice piece for them to already go to their boss and say, hey, this is a good thing that I really enjoyed being at. Let's make sure we get this into the budget for the next year. So it was always kind of a nice piece to already have to be able to give out once you go. So I made sure that was printed and ready to go prior to me leaving my institution to head out to the event, to the conference. The other thing that I did prior to leaving for the conference is I made sure that my sponsors and my exhibitors knew what they were getting into. So I made sure that I created a kind of an exhibitor's letter that had like a link to where to register, like a Word document that had the link to where to register, what that comp code was, the link to the hotel to register, made sure that they knew what the exhibit setup times, teardown times, and what the exhibit times were, confirming that all in one letter. When the breaks were, so they knew like when, if they had more than one person that was exhibiting with them, when they needed to make sure that they were there for those. And then also, if you guys had different, special events or something like opening reception, or there was something that was special to your conference that was a good space for them to be in, a good space for them to network, that I would make sure that I suggested that would be things that they attended. Because a lot of times these exhibitors or sponsors have never been to your event. And so it was kind of nice to personalize and have them understand how to navigate your particular conference. And so that was a really, I think, a key piece for a lot of my exhibitors and sponsors to know that they knew what they were getting into prior to coming to the conference. So that was something that I sent out prior to them coming there, so they knew exactly what they were getting into prior to being there. And I think that helped them be successful because they knew what they were, how to be successful. They knew what to expect. So that was very helpful. I also made sure that I confirmed with my conference committee if you promised, if they were sponsoring a session, or if they were sponsoring or verbally being recognized at an opening reception or a keynote or something of that nature, I was making sure that that was put in the notes. I was making sure that I was connecting with whoever conference committee member was responsible for whatever, that I was double checking with that prior to leaving for the conference, that I was making sure that the print materials, that the posters and everything were being taken care of prior to getting there, so there was no kind of on-site crises, if you will. So that was a big piece of making sure that our sponsors and exhibitors had a good experience there. So, and then also, just so it wasn't last minute, I made sure that I created some type of assessment, whether that was through SurveyMonkey or Campus Labs, if your institution had that. Mine did, and they allowed us to use that. That I created that prior to leaving, so I made sure that it was very easy for me then just send it out as I right as they were leaving the conference, so I knew that they were going to get it, and reminding them that, hey, now that the conference is over, tell me how it went for you. What were the things that you liked? What could we have done better? What would you like to see? So I made sure that that was created and it wasn't kind of an aftermath, because I think we all know being on a conference committee is exhausting. And when you get back, you're a little burnt out. So it's just kind of nice to be a little bit proactive in that regard. So once I was on site, just making sure that your exhibit space, that you had table tents, so it was very clear as to where they needed to set up. For me personally, it was kind of nice to have a little bit of a goodie bag. I called local grocery stores and asked for them to donate a 24-pack of water and like some granola bars. I mean, if your conference committee just wanted to purchase that for a couple bucks, whatever, it's up to you how you want to handle that. But it was just kind of an added touch for a couple bucks. It doesn't hurt, and it's kind of a nice, the exhibitors and the sponsors are going to remember that. And it doesn't take a lot for them to remember that as part of their nice experience coming to it and knowing that you guys care and that it wasn't an afterthought. So that was something that I did. And then I also made sure that they had my contact information. So for whatever reason, if there was a hiccup or they had a question, that they always knew that they could get a hold of me. So I always made sure that those things were on their table, even if I wasn't around, that they could get a hold of me. So during check-in, a lot of times there is a confusion, and I think this is just kind of a NASPA process, is a lot of times when they pay to exhibit, there's, I think, some confusion that they think that their payment and their process of payment is their payment for their registration for the conference. And so sometimes they won't register for the conference. And I know that can be a little sticky, and that's just kind of, that's at the national level as well. And so we always want to make sure that exhibitors feel like that's going to be a smooth process. So we have to register them really quickly at the table, then that's something that we do, but we want to make sure that's a smooth process for them. So it happens, it's a hiccup, but we try to make sure that it's done. So a lot of times I try to make sure that I check in and have it done, but I check my names against the registration list before they get on site. But sometimes they just don't register before they get there. And so even if they don't, we just don't want it to be this big process like, oh, you didn't do it. So we just want to make sure that's a smooth process, because they just gave us $1,000 to be there, right? Plus their travel, plus all that, right? So we just want to make sure that's a smooth process. So that was a big piece, is making sure that process is a smooth thing. Someone say something?
I'd add either myself, Nathan, or Colleen will be at each of the regional conferences that are coming up. So if there are any issues for any of the sponsors specifically, it's easy enough to just ask one of us. We have access to the back end of the system. We can get them registered with the code that they should have, and then we can get a name badge printed for them on site. So there will be a NASPA staff at all of the upcoming fall regional conferences.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Yeah. So just trying to make sure that we're able to help them with that, and that we don't just try to send them to the registration booth and that be a piece, but we're actually that liaison. We're really being that person to advocate on their behalf. And then I think the other big piece is that I would say that they're personally just being in the position, some of the comments that I got was like, it's so nice that you actually came back and checked on us, and that you didn't just like show us our booth and then like that was the last time we saw you, and that like you took our money and then ran. Like it was nice that you actually cared and you came back and you checked in and you just made sure that we were still having a good experience and that this is a good piece. And so I think that's a big piece for me of like what I think made me successful in this position, was just making sure that you were just checking in, and making sure things were going okay during the day, and that there wasn't any questions or concerns. And so that's why I put, just making sure that we're checking throughout the whole exhibiting time is a big piece of it. And then, as I mentioned, those postcards from earlier that you would have printed before, I think that's another like kind of a touch point, another excuse for like kind of checking in is like, hey, towards the end of the experience, you're like, hope your time here was great with us. And, just remember, we're in XYZ next year. And so save the date. Here's the dates. And if you have those already confirmed exhibit booths, costs and things, here they are. And so make sure you get it in there, because, generally fiscal years are that July time. So it's good to make sure that they're already putting that on their calendar as one of their events that they want to be at. So it's really great to kind of have that opportunity to already have that in their hand. So that's a kind of how I would kind of go through that. Some other pieces that I kind of didn't put on here, and I don't know if it's like really region specific, but one of the things that we had at our conference was Aramark would always sponsor a VPSA reception. So that was kind of like another piece of the puzzle for me. And so I had to work with them to try to because we don't share email addresses, I was in charge of actually inviting all of those people because I had to obviously send out those invites internally and things. So, there's also some other logistics to that as well, and trying to make sure that you're keeping those balls in the air as well. And I think a lot of that comes to making sure that a lot of communication with your conference team and things of that nature as well. So again, I feel like this is very overly simplified as to what the corporate liaisons probably do. And I'm sure that changes very differently. And I'm sure for Western Regionals, it's very different from what 4 West does, considering the sizes of those regions. But, these I think are just some very simplistic ways of what I think has worked well for us. So, So just kind of going into what I had done towards, like just in the aftermath of the conference, is just making sure that I did send out that assessment within that 7 days of the event, just to make sure that they kind of have fresh in their mind what they did appreciate and what they didn't appreciate about the event. So we knew what we could add and not add. And I think it's also really important that the conference committee is aware of what worked well and didn't work well. What I really appreciated about my RD, and what I appreciate about our conference chairs, is that they really listened to the feedback that we got from our exhibitors, and were really intentional about making sure that our exhibit hall and like our food were very close together, so that the traffic was very purposeful, because that was a big piece of making our exhibitors happy, is that constant traffic. And so, I think just keeping those things in mind about, what it is that, makes them successful and happy. And a big part of that tends to be, the proximity of food to the exhibit space. So, and I think the closer it is, the more successful it tends to be. And I think Fred and I could both vouch for that, regardless of what event it is, that tends to be pretty on par for everything we do. So, yeah. So other than that, I would always go to the annual conference. I had a very supportive boss, and so I was able to always go to the annual conference. And so I'd always check in with the people that were potential exhibitors, or ones that I'd had at our regional conference, and just say hi, and again thank them and remind them of our upcoming conference, and see if there was any potentials that I think would be interested in doing regional conferences there. And then I would start again sending those save the dates out again in that May, June, July, depending on like when my conference And as I had mentioned earlier, that SSAO reception was actually open to all of our exhibitors and sponsors. And so that was kind of that nice time that our SSAOs and exhibitors had that time to kind of be a little bit more one-on-one, and were able to like really kind of connect with those like higher level decision makers. So, yeah.
Well, we can open it up now for some general questions or comments. If you were doing things in your experience, for anyone who's here, either as RIDs that joined us, or I know Joey on here has done this in the past as well. If you have any insights that you'd like to share, feel free, or we can answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question that I would just be curious to hear from other regions. This is Joey from Region 2. I think one of the things that's been interesting that I've definitely heard over the past few years, I think just associated with, we have just in NASPA all these different conferences and all these different regions. And then there are other professional organizations that have tons of conferences each year. And I definitely have certainly gotten the sense a lot of sponsors are only willing to commit to so many things, or they're being pulled by other conferences, or they're already committed to the national and they can't really, commit to a regional. So I'd just be curious to hear about other people like experience that, any ways to overcome some of those things. I mean, some of it's just like, okay, you can't work with us and that's fine. But I just kind of wanted to throw that to the group to see if others have perspective or insight on kind of like that concept.
In the Western Regional Conference, and this was something I was also going to bring up, and Chris, correct me when I'm wrong here, but I think what had happened was we had a series of years going back going back 3 years, we had a series of years where the sponsorship people were SSAOs, very good at connecting with corporate sponsors and had long-standing positive relationships with them, so that we had a series of years where our corporate sponsorships were very robust, and most of our major events were fully sponsored by primarily the major food service corporations. And then the last few years, we've seen that drop off. In some cases, people have just pulled back because of some of the reasons you just mentioned, Joey, or they've greatly reduced their amounts. And so I know Chris had done a little survey among the RDs just to see, was everybody experiencing this? And I think we kind of determined that to a certain degree, people were experiencing a bit of a pullback. But I think also what we learned was that we had, because we had a series of really great years in this area that I'm not sure anybody else was experiencing, but we began to expect that level. And so when it dropped off, and some of it, quite frankly, was because of the relationships weren't continued. Then we were kind of like, oh man, now what do we do? Because we had come to expect that amount of, money flowing in. So those would just be some considerations I would throw out there for people. And then I guess my question is the same as you, Joey, is have other people experienced this drop off, or is this just sort of an anomaly for us?
Yeah, if I could add it, Kenny kind of hit it spot on in terms of the thing. I think the other factor related to that is that we got because of that, we got some good sponsorship. It was also in one domain or one industry. It was the big three food service folks. And so, which, was, and some of them were giving us some very significant donations. And then once, this year, especially you're going to Portland, we're getting some donations, but not near the same. So, I think part of the challenge we've had at the WRC is that we got too dependent on just the same folks coming back around. So I'd be more interested in figuring out how to. I felt the same thing that Joey was mentioning in terms of it seems like there's just so many different conference opportunities that they just can't go to everything, all things NASPA. I mean, there's that, and there's also the other associations too. It's just how do we diversify revenue bases, or how do we diversify potential vendors, but also know that we're not just, competing with each other too, over competing with each other because to them they're making the choice between going to the Western Regional or East Coast Region Conference, right? And my other reflections, I spent a long time in Fort West too, and Fort West is always, Chrissy's talked about this, but I think one of the things that Fort West has always done very well is that this has been the vendoring's always been very. It's been a sustainable commitment by the board where they have permanent presence, and anytime you're handing this off to each conference person, it's very challenging. And I think that's part of. There's like what Kenny was saying, as there's predominantly people in 6 that were driving this, but like in 5, we only have to really handle. We host the conference every 3rd year, right? So whoever our person on our side is kind of nurturing this vendor relationships only gets to do this every 3 years versus 6 builds those relationships over 2 years. So to me, it's kind of that push-pull between having a sustaining joint conference, but also making sure that we got to figure out how to sustain that vendor relations beyond just where it's located, which region's hosting it the next year. And I think it's kind of what me and Candy have been kind of wrapping our head around. It's like, how do we make this more sustainable as long as we continue the WRC?
And how do we build realistic expectations?
Right.
Our Hawaii conference 3 years ago, and I'm sorry I don't have these numbers at the tip of my tongue, but I'm going to guess between those 3 food service people, we might have generated close to $100,000. And then there were people in our leadership teams who thought, okay, well, next year we'll make even more. and that just wasn't realistic.
And I'm guessing if a vendor has the opportunity to go to Hawaii to vendor versus Wichita, Kansas, that that's an easy choice to make probably too. They can afford to go there. They have to pick one, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also, Chris, I think it's both the locations, but then there's also, I think, the size. Whereas Western is just significantly larger than some of the other conferences that do exist.
Right, and now what we're paying for is that because we're large and we got a lot of money from the big three food service vendors. Now that they're not doing it, we're slightly panicking to a certain extent.
Well, and I'd like to put this. It might already be on the RD agenda for December, but in our in-person meeting, because I also want to talk a little bit about the annual conference and just sort of the interplay between the regional conferences and the annual conference. And I don't want to. I think somebody had mentioned earlier. I don't want to step on each other's toes. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the philosophy of those coordinating sponsors. I'm more concerned about sponsorship issues than exhibitor issues. I think the exhibitor issues kind of work themselves out, but because again, as I think Chris was mentioning, the corporations just see NASPA. I don't, they probably aren't spending a lot of time thinking NASPA annual versus NASPA regional, and I'm not suggesting that we have to be lockstep coordinated, but I think we probably need to at least just discuss it a little bit.
Yeah, Candy, I think that discussion piece is definitely, and I think the sponsorship coordinators need to be integrally involved in the conversation, and I do think it's a RD and almost even board level conversation at that point, because should the conference chair, or how does the conference chair who sits on the board of directors have more intentional conversations? Because, I think Fred and Christy are great at soliciting and making those connections, but ultimately it ties back to the bottom line of the conference and how that affects, those pieces. So are there specific examples, Candy, that you can think of that might illuminate the pain points, or do you just more so mean in general and how the conversations are happening?
No, I don't have any examples, but only because I don't know all of the intricacies of the conversations. But I think of, and I'll just use Region 6, for one of the reasons why those corporate sponsorship dollars were so large in Hawaii was because of people like Henry G. and Lori Idetta, who had long-standing relationships with the food service vendors and got other SSAOs to make calls and just kind of, put pressure on those companies to give bigger, and they did. But I have no idea how any of that interplayed with those companies' relationships at the national level, at the central office level or at the annual conference level. And maybe they're not related. I'm not sure. And I don't want to get into a situation where we're over legislating or over, I'm not looking for some big policy or something. I just think we probably need to discuss it so that let's say one of my Region 6 people isn't out here making an ask for something at the same time that somebody in the central office is trying to leverage some ask. It's kind of like on our campuses, we preach all the time. Our fundraising people don't necessarily want our activities office put full court press on some donor that they're trying to approach. So
right.
We probably just need to have a conversation about how it works and then explore it. Is it working in the way that we want it to be working?
Yeah, I really think it's more of a discussion point. And I appreciate what Nathan was saying about it being a board discussion, because I think there's a couple of competing things that are competing tension points. And I don't know, it's necessarily like Candy said, it's not necessarily a policy, but as a board member, we're expected to engage with vendors at the national board level, to steward that within the NASPA relationship. But we also have this competing process to also try to get folks to attend our the things that we're fiduciary responsible for, making, good conferences and stuff like that, right? And like I really like how Kenny mentioned, individuals who have longstanding histories in NASPA and vendor relations. And I just think, like, I'll just use my campus as an example as attention. I'm a small campus of 2,000 students, so I don't have the spending power of most schools, right? So I don't have those vendor relationships. So I want to contribute and support NASPA, but then I also have to, a lot of reason why they were successful in doing that was because they've had long-standing relationship with those vendors, and they know vice chancellors that have that, right? So, and I'm not trying to make this like a equity conversation or something like that. It's like, I think we all want to contribute, but I think also the economies of how vendor relationships are being developed or the ways that we at institutions, the way that we develop vendoring relationships is much different too. So, like, I think a lot of our newer vice presidents for student affairs aren't going to have that, I've known John or Susan at Aramark for 20 years, I'll give them a call, right? That's just, that side of our business is evolving too, which is making it hard for us to lean on long-term relationships, because that's just not how a lot of the business side of the universities are operating, right? Because a lot of times my experience in NASPA, the folks who have been very successful at vendor relationships are the ones that have that institutional spending power relationship established, so that they can, put pressure on them to participate in NASPA too. And so I think we have to have a conversation about how we work better together, so we're not, that we're doing what's best in terms of steering vendors across all areas of NASPA. That makes sense?
Yeah, Chris, and I think I can add it. We can add it, I think, to the conversation moving forward for the RDs.
Right. It's like, we don't want to be pulled into, I think as far as like, feeling like we're pulled in two different directions between, trying to steward our conferences and also being good board members in NASPA, right?
And I'll just say, as somebody who is looking at working on sponsors and exhibitors for next year's Western Regional, this is a really important conversation and timely, as I've been thinking about, approaching individuals or even brainstorming who may be important to reach out to support our conference. I'm interested in the conversation that is happening between the regional and national, but I also appreciate, Chris and Candy, your articulation of our joint Western Regional, which is really unique, and the importance of working together, and yet also understanding what the expectations may be about fundraising for an individual year and how one achieves that. So thank you for exploring this. This is important.
I give Kenny some credit. Like, Kenny's done an amazing job in terms of this year hosting in 6 in Portland, in terms of, the way that she's been able to put at ease my conference chair at times about, this is not Hawaii. This is not Hawaii, right? So, which happens in all, I've seen this happen in other organizations I've been involved with. There seems to be this arms race in terms of over up in the next conference over and over again. That's just not feasible sometimes.
Agreed. I think a race not only in funding, but maybe even in attendees and size, and sort of this, let's get it bigger and better. And, there are so many implications that go with that.
So having said all that, I would also like to say, on the other side of that, and this doesn't I understand where you guys are coming from for sure, but there are those who do really appreciate having the regional piece of it. And we do have people who reach out wanting just to be at certain regions or to just go to the regional conferences. And I have reached out to those regional reps and have sent them people who are just interested in being at the regional conferences. So I do want you to understand too that it isn't that people are just looking to be at these national conferences. There are people who are looking because they are the rep for the Northeast, or they're for the rep for the Midwest, or they are the rep for the West Coast. And so just know that it isn't, I know there's a lot of competing conferences even outside of NASPA, but there are people who are really looking for that regional piece. And that I will say, even as the regional rep, there's something to be said too about the focus of regional conferences. And that was always something that I really sold, is that you definitely get a lot more one-on-one time at those conferences versus national conferences. And so I will say there's a lot of people who do find a lot of value in a regional conference versus the national conferences. And so I do know that there's definitely a need for this conversation. But I will say in the last probably month or so, I know I've reached out to Danny because we had like 3 or 4 different vendors reach out to me that were looking to sign up for different regional conferences too. So just know that it isn't just them looking for us, that we also are reaching out to different regions too. So, but Fred, what are your thoughts on trending for food services too?
Yeah, Candy, you mentioned that you've noticed that they're pulling out a little bit and maybe declining their support. Same thing's happening at the national level from what I've gathered so far for Austin next year. Sodexo doesn't even go to the NASPA annual conference anymore. I don't know if you all knew that, but they're not coming anymore, And Chartwell's has mentioned that they're going to step back a little bit. Aramark is kind of doing the same, but overall they're not doing more. Let's put it that way. So I don't know if that helps at all, because I know you were asking about if anyone else is feeling the same type of decline, but I think it's just the nature of the beast, right? I mean, they're all being asked by lots of different organizations, not only NASPA, but all the other higher ed associations, right? They got to plan their budget, and it's very cyclical for them as well. They're looking at what's their ROI, or return on investment, and sometimes they just shift things around, right, as to what makes the most sense. So I don't know if this helps at all, but I just kind of want to let you know what's happening on the national level as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful, because I wondered that. And what might also be helpful, I don't know how we would do this, but some kind of information from you, or even a conversation about what are sectors that are a little bit more up and coming. So, like, I've noticed at some of the conferences I've gone to in the last year, I've noticed a lot more residence hall furniture companies out there. Or I've also noticed more training related companies out there. And I think the honorary groups have more of a presence. Now, it's a little bit difficult, like with the honorary groups, because they're often nonprofit. So I don't know what kind of funds they would have for, there's certainly vendors, but I don't know about sponsorships. And I don't know if there are other industries that the annual conference is seeing more up and coming.
Candy, I'm wondering about the organizations that are doing data analytics because of this really incredible, intense push to be able to anticipate what our students are going to do and therefore serve them.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Plus, data analytics and even software, student management systems or other kinds of software.
A lot of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, AI is big in mobile app engagement companies. They seem to be coming up left and right.
I would agree.
Everyone's getting the investment money, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate the higher ed market.
Yeah, that's interesting, because like I've gone to a couple of EDUCAUSE things, and it's very interesting to see how the student success agenda that we've been talking about forever, right, is really permeating their conferences and stuff like that. So when I went to the IT conference, you're seeing a lot of folks like the EABs and things like that, right? Which is very important, because that's data analytics, but really they're talking to the technologists, right? And so, I mean, and in many ways, it's like, how do we get those types of groups saying, hey, student affairs is also a place that you want to engage also, because we're the ones that are actually the applied researchers using these systems and things like that, right? Because a CIO's perspective in bringing this tool is a much different perspective than a senior student affairs officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I find myself victim to this even locally on my campus and also at WSU. I always call it I always joke with my chancellor, who is a former provost, is like anytime they go to an ACE conference or something like that, they bring back all the EAB and other material saying, look, all these magical retention solutions, right? And so those companies are out there. I just don't think they're really talking to us as a student affairs group as they do to our colleagues across our enterprises.
I'd like to add one more piece. I think it was Candy who mentioned about the sustainability of the sponsors, and this is something that we've been talking about on the national level too. Is especially since it's volunteer driven and you have like a cycle of a liaison going off and then a new one coming back on. Is I'm just wondering if the regions have thought about doing a multi-year agreement for even 2, maybe even 3 years, and could you do that? Is it even feasible? And that way you know that, okay, you're getting X amount for these next 3 years. And it's just an idea, but I didn't know if that's something that could help with the sustainability. So you don't have to do the ask every year, but if you can create a package that they see value no matter where the event will be in the next 3 years, that could be a piece of the puzzle.
I think it's definitely worth discussing about feasibility. So we've had similar conversations about other, centralized supports, distributed services. Like how can we centralize resources as regional directors so that we communicate effectively, that consistently. So I think this is a good topic in terms of as we continue to discuss, how do we share resources as regions? They're all kind of accomplishing the same thing. So I think it's time. I think it's a timely discussion that this kind of keep approaching. Don't you? What do you think, Candy and others?
You guys know
I love the
3 years out
agreement idea. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just curious if you guys knew 3 years out where you guys were going to be located. I'm wondering if that has anything to do with like an agreement that would hinder it.
It's getting a little bit better. Christy, many of the regions are starting to, everyone's sourced at least 1 year out. So I think a 2-year agreement would definitely be possible. I think 3 is a little bit hard, but Western is there now. So, and Chris, I know you're starting for 20.
Yeah. We kind of get it. Yeah. I definitely 2 years in this, that might be the soft way to pilot it. It doesn't seem unreasonable to be planning 2 years out, at least knowing where you're going to go, right?
I'm just thinking travel, if that's like, if it's Hawaii, I just wonder if like that might be a question with sponsorship and exhibiting.
It also, I think, philosophically, and Chris and Candy, I think this is the RD conversation too, of, because Joey, you sit on the advisory board and the conference committee, correct? Yeah, so I think some of it is structurally how each region is individually doing sponsorship. And Christy, For West was the same way, right?
Yes.
It's the sponsorship person on the conference committee also is the same one on the board. And I think that then changes some of the conversation of, well, does the conference sit independent, and I'm air quoting independent of the advisory board, or what is that relationship? Because I think that's then where to Leah's earlier point, then a multi-year contract directly butts up against the concept of my conference and this other person's conference. It's the conference at large. And I think that's one of the philosophical questions that I think each region would need to individually decide.
That's a great point. When I was commenting about my past experience for West, I kind of missed that note. That the vendor is also on the advisory board too, right? I think what's unique to 5 and 6 is that we're going to do a joint conference every year for the foreseeable future. So part of it's maybe looking more internally is do we create like a shared position or something like that to get steward this? I don't know, but if there's opportunity for us to collaborate with other regions that are having similar needs, that's great too, right? So I think part of it's like, between our respective regions, what do we do? But then also how can we, because we kind of have we have a unique relationship that we're going to do it every year, right? Until we decide not to.
And this is interesting because it makes me think a little bit about something that I've been thinking about lately is, how are vendors sponsoring the conference versus how are they sponsors of our region or more part of the, the work of the region beyond just the conference, and kind of maybe, thinking about how do we articulate that and how do we make that happen. I've been thinking a lot about engaging these sponsors beyond the conference, and actually have started a little bit of that. We did something a month or so ago with one of our sponsors from this past year that was, to kind of promote the ongoing relationship, and to make it something more than just give us your check, come to this conference once a year, and make it more of this is a relationship that you're entering into with our region and our organization beyond this singular event. So I know we're almost out of time, but that's a whole different conversation I think that could be had, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently.
That's awesome. It's wonderful. Because again, it's that relationship. It's not that, let's just take your money and get the big piece of it, right? And it's that sustainability piece of it. So yeah, and definitely a different conversation, but it's great that you guys are developing that touch point and that longevity. So.
And it really shouldn't be, when you think about it, it should be more than just the regional conference, right? They should feel there should be some legs to the relationship before the event and even after, and what's happening at the regional level that makes sense for them to be a part of.
Do any of the regions currently, or can we have like annual sponsors and their logos be on our regional websites, or is that something that's not been broached before? We have our sponsors. NASPA has their big sponsors, right? But do any of the regions have saying this is a sponsor of our region on their individual sites?
I think we've done on our conference page before.
Well, I'm talking about the sponsor for the conference, or just like sponsor of the region.
I'm just saying, hey, for $5,000, you are a platinum sponsor of Region 5. You get so much at the conference, but although you also have this badge on our website saying you're one of our great, thank you for your continued sponsorship. Or is it all this? Is it like the regional recognition always been directly tied to a conference? I guess that's what I'm saying. And how's that interplay with NASPA's corporate sponsors, right?
Yeah. In the past, and Joe, I don't know if you know this, I know Region 2 at one point tried it. I don't know how successful it was, but did larger sponsorship, and you would sponsor the conference. You would get, I think, the Careers and Student Affairs Month, and then there would be something else. And I think the logo would go up onto the regional page, not just the regional conference. So kind of our, year-round sponsor, whatever that was.
Like a corporate sponsor.
I don't know how many people actually liked that or went for it, but it was something that they started to develop and started to look at as an option.
Yeah, I think for 4 West, the agreement was that your logo would go up year-round if you were like a certain level of sponsorship. So you could do it where you had a really high level, and that would maybe be $10,000, but then you would be the sponsor for the whole year for the region. But then you would also get gold membership or gold sponsorship at the conference as well. You know what I mean? It says a 2-for-1 kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, because then you also don't want every region discounting their corporate sponsorships, right? And then a vendor saying, "Oh, I'll just buy up 6 regional corporate sponsorships and then not do the national thing too." I mean, that'd be kind of interesting interplay of some of our corporate partners, right?
Yeah, logistically, yeah, I think
it's
a larger conversation.
You buy 6 regional things and 1 big NASPA thing, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming together. I know we're closing out our
Great conversation.
So thank you all so much for this conversation. It's helpful for us as staff, and hopefully for you all on the volunteer side of how to manage this. I will send out the recording and the notes late by the end of the day once it all transpires, and we'll make sure that we have further opportunities to talk. If anything else comes up, if you have any other questions, feel free to let myself, Fred, or Christina.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, Fred and I are here to help, and if there's anything that we can do, and especially since I held this position, I mean, it's been a couple of years, so I'm a little rusty, but I'm happy to, you can pick my brain for what I have done, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. But we're always here to help for you. If there's anything we can answer or can kind of help navigate, we'd be happy to do that.
Well, thanks for starting the conversation. This has been great so far.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Great.
Good talking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.